First of all, wishing everyone a very energizing 2025, since this is hosted by the Precourt Institute for Energy. I'm very delighted. Hopefully this is one of your first seminars you're attending this year. I'm delighted to be welcoming Jessica Wolf from General Electric Vernova. Jessica has been at the helm of the energy transition for more than 2 decades. She's the president of GE Vernova, which encompasses GE's energy portfolio in the power, wind, and the electrification sectors. It's a startup. The company spun off from GE just in April of 2024, so it's a new but large startup. And Jessica has had a distinguished career in the energy business, and we're so delighted to have her here to inspire us with what's happening on the front line of the energy transition and the realities of the energy transition. She was, prior to GE, the Chief Financial Officer of Shell. She has also served on the board of directors of Goldman Sachs and of GE as well. Outside of her corporate leadership, Jessica has also been very active in climate nonprofits. For example, for Columbia's Center for Global Energy Policy, and also serving on the boards of Mission Possible Partnership, among many others. The Stanford Energy Transition Leadership Seminar is meant to bring the practitioners from outside of Stanford here to share their journey, their learnings, their insights, and their prediction of what's coming next. So I hope this presentation by Jessica and the conversation that will follow will give you ideas that you don't already have today and also inspire us to do something different. So on that note, let us welcome Jessica to the stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. And first of all, let me extend my appreciation to Will and the Stanford Energy community for inviting me to be here today. I've had a pretty full day. Have a couple other team members with me as well. And it's been very impressive. It's made having this speech a little bit more daunting because I've come to fully appreciate appreciate all of the really great work that's happening here. I wanted to spend a few minutes just as a start. Will did some of this already in terms of introducing GE Vernova. It is a new company, so I think I'll just want to make sure you know what we are and what we're doing. Talk a little bit about our innovation priorities, because this is an innovation and research institution, and it's where I think we hopefully will find ways to work even more closely together going forward. And then finally, I'm going to share a few reflections in terms of my sense of the state of the energy transition and where I see some of the challenges and some of the opportunities. GE Vernova, we spun out from GE in April of this year, as Will mentioned, as a publicly traded company. It was the 12 energy businesses of General Electric from the past. Those 12 companies came together. The business fundamentally is producing, manufacturing the equipment of the energy system. It is turbine manufacturing, both gas and wind. It is transmission equipment, substation equipment, power transformers, pieces that automate the grid, and then it's software as well. So the software that actually runs transmission and distribution networks around the world. In addition, it also runs the financial markets for a lot of the energy systems around the world as well. So pretty sophisticated software capability that we have. To complement that, we have an R&D team that came into the organization. We also have consulting services, which is an important piece of the capabilities that we bring. These are deep experts in energy systems that help customers, countries, help plan and think about the future energy system and how to create that energy system. And then finally, we have something called financial services, which helps our customers think about how do you actually finance these projects and help with the innovation of that and securing equity as well as debt in terms of building some of the energy infrastructure projects that we then in turn provide the equipment for. So that's a bit of a sense of the company. Again, this is just give you another sense of the company in terms of we're operating across the entire power system from the generation through the transfer of that energy, the orchestration of that through our software products. And then we also offer some solar and storage solutions to complement what we provide in terms of grid solutions for our customers. A little bit more deeply, I referenced some of this as well. From the generation side, gas turbines, some 25% of all of the energy that is produced in the world goes through a piece of GE equipment, which is a pretty extraordinary fact. A lot of it through the gas turbines, but we're also in steam, hydro, and nuclear. We were one of the kind of founders of the nuclear industry back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. On the wind side, we're in onshore and offshore wind. We also make our own blades. We're the largest provider of wind turbines in the United States in terms of onshore. Electrification, this is, as I mentioned, the grid solutions piece, the transmission piece, the substation piece, power conversion, and the solar and storage. And electrification software. As I said, 25% of the world's electricity goes through our equipment. Now, in terms of innovation, as I mentioned, we have a research center that's based in Niskayuna, New York, and also in India. We have some 275 researchers in that corporate group that has a very rich legacy. And this is probably familiar to you. The General Electric, the original founder was Thomas Edison, and it has been an extraordinary source of innovation across many industries over the last 100 years that has caused massive disruption and massive improvement in the quality of life across many sectors. We're hoping to build on that legacy as we go forward and really genuinely lead the energy transition and lead towards a more abundant, prosperous future. And we do this in a very collaborative way. We have a very rich ecosystem. We collaborate, of course, internally with our business partners. We want to be solving real problems for our customers. And we have a lot of partners that we're working with on R&D projects. But of course, we're very engaged with the government as well. Department of Energy, Department of Defense, with the national labs. Some 50% of our funding is coming from external third parties. We think it's a good way not only to enable collaboration, ensure collaboration, but also to ensure we're working on things that matter, and matter not just to us, that aren't just hobbies, but matter to our customers, matter to the world, and are making a difference. In terms of the model that we have all of our research and our programs shaped around 3 missions. Those missions are decarbonization, renewables, acceleration, and electrification. And you can see here some of the topics that we're focusing on. On the decarbonization, how do we get 100% hydrogen combustion for our gas turbines? How do we ensure for existing projects and new projects, we can move gas generation to be low or no carbon through things like CCS? We're working on direct air capture because that will also be needed in terms of the solutions for us to achieve net zero. In the renewables piece, a lot of that has been around the manufacturability. 55,000 turbines are in operation in the United States. That number is going to grow exponentially, I hope. How do you produce that in a way that is reliable and dependable in terms of quality? And then ensuring that those fleets are operating effectively. We're using things like AI to help improve both the manufacturing of our assets, but also how we're operating those assets as well. Electrification, a lot going on in this space. This is one of the fastest growing pieces of our business today, and we expect that to continue going forward. There's a lot of R&D that has to happen in the electrification space in terms of ensuring the grid of the future. We need a more dynamic grid. The grid is becoming more complex. There's more demands on it in terms of where demand is being located, where supply is being located, how the assets work together, cybersecurity, weather resilience, climate resilience, et cetera. A lot needs to happen, and the grid has not seen the modernization that it needs. So a lot of innovation money will be headed towards electrification as we try and, again, build the grid of the future along with the energy system of the future. This is going into a little bit more detail on some of the projects that we've been working on. We've got our own novel approach to direct air capture, hydrogen combustion I mentioned, nuclear, spend a few sentences on that. Our nuclear business, today we service existing boiling water reactors from our heritage. We also provide fuel to the reactors today, and we're building a small modular reactor program as well. We have signed commercial agreements. We're looking to have the first SMR in operation by the end of this decade. We believe that may be first of its kind globally, and a lot of energy across the whole organization in terms of trying to make that a really viable, compelling, and scalable solution as fast as possible. On the renewable side, I've mentioned that a bit, and I'll also do a bit of a shout out on the AI side in a moment. We've got Justin John here who runs the AI program for us, and it's worth a bit of a shout out. And so if you want to talk AI, please, maybe Justin, you can raise your hand and just let everyone know that you're here. A good person to talk to. On the renewable side, as I said, a lot around quality, manufacturability, operability of the assets. A lot of value there. It also underpins the resiliency of the sector, frankly, because if it's not operating well, it doesn't encourage people to buy more. A lot on the control side, again, just massive digitization and sophistication happening across the energy system. A lot of this just did not keep up with the pace of technological development, and there's a lot of makeup that needs to happen across the energy system. Electrification side, the HVDC and TAPs, how do we make these, the DC infrastructure more accessible and benefiting the communities in which it crosses? There's innovation in this space that we hope to lead that will make, one, the system better, more efficient, more effective, but also support the communities that are impacted by the infrastructure coming through them. So that's one of the initiatives I'm particularly excited about, and particularly important, I think, trying to bring that sector to North America, very active in Europe, and how do we make that happen here in the US as well. Also within our research facility, we stood up our AI activity this year. I mean, we've only been in existence for 9 months, so there's been a lot that's been happening. Really pleased with the progress that we're making across the board. We are more excited about what we're seeing and what we're delivering within this program that Justin's been very capably running. Our first priority has been how do we run the company better? We're now morphing into then how do we use this technology to innovate our products and services for our customers. This is showing you just kind of the acceleration and the capability of the models that are being used and how quickly they have either reached and likely surpassed the capacity of humans in a number of key areas. So we're really working hard to understand that, harness that, and use it across the business. Some of the instances that we've had some real luck with have been, or real success with, has been on case resolution. You have 55,000 wind turbines operating. Things happen. You get a warning. You get a signal. You get some kind of indication that something needs to happen. We're getting a lot of those. Tens and thousands as you think about the assets that we have across the world. The capacity for humans to process that and resolve those issues quickly is kind of beyond human capacity. We're using AI to enable better, faster, higher quality responses, and we're seeing that happen, and that's really, really quite exciting for us. Coding, we've been bringing in the coding support to support our software business. I mentioned that at the beginning, very sophisticated software business. How can we leverage, again, AI to help us do that faster, higher quality, less likelihood for error, better documentation of what you're doing, all of those things that AI does so gracefully, where humans may not always kind of dot their I's and cross their T's in the ways that they should. And again, seeing a lot of success there on the AI side. We're going to expand that investment next year and really looking forward to seeing how we can lead in the space. And we think we are uniquely well placed in terms of the quality and the nature of the data that we have to bring some really unique insights to our business and hopefully to the world. So I've done a bit of a run through on Vernova to give you a sense of what it was, and happy to share more, but I think that's relatively straightforward, but I think it's important. We've only been around for 9 months. And I'm really excited by the company and what we are able to do. I think we hold a unique set of capabilities, whether from a manufacturing perspective to our consulting and to our R&D. I don't think there's anyone else quite like us out there, and I believe we have the opportunity and the responsibility to really drive leadership on the energy transition, which is needed more now than ever before. And that's why I came to Vernova. I was on the board of GE before, and I was working on the board with the spin out. And as I looked at this company and I looked at the moment, I thought, no, I want to be a part of this. I want to help shape the future of this company because I think it has a real opportunity to make a difference. Now, turning to some reflections on the energy transition and kind of the state of play, I'm just going to share a few things, and then Will and I will pick it up a bit more in our conversation. And this is a very sophisticated audience, and so it's difficult kind of how to strike the right balance. You all probably have a pretty strong sense of what some of the challenges and opportunities are, but I'm going to tease out a few of them in terms of how I certainly think about these issues. And first of all, in terms of just the major backdrop of the challenges and opportunities of defining and designing and delivering the energy system of the future, we need more. I mean, we need more across the board. The amount of energy that's needed and the amount of power that's needed is extraordinary in terms of the growth rates, getting from here to 2050. And that is driven by population growth, going from 8 to 10 billion. It's driven by wealth accumulation and prosperity. So wealth accumulation as people move into the middle classes in places like India. People want refrigerators, people want air conditioning, people want to travel. All of that will increase the average amount of energy being consumed by per person across the globe over the next coming decades. And that's even before you get to AI. So there was already a huge need for more energy before the last couple of years and before AI. You layer AI on top of it, the amount of energy that's required is extraordinary. We also need more power to decarbonize, because one of the best ways of decarbonizing the energy system is to move it off of fuel, a fossil fuel, and move it onto an electron. Today, power is some 20% of the energy system. We expect that will go to 40 to 50%. So not only do you need more energy, but the composition of the energy system needs to change from one that's molecule-based to being more electron-based. So a lot more power. More complexity, and I mentioned this before, the more complexity piece is we had a very linear system. I think I actually have, that's just showing you the amounts of power that's needed. This is the IEA's most recent scenarios that came out. And there's 3 different pieces there: the stated policies, the announced pledges, and the net zero. The stated policies are kind of probably the most tied to what's policies that are already in place. The announced pledges, these are the ambitions that people have. And then the net zero is what you would actually need to do to achieve net zero by 2050. So you get a sense of the amount of power that is required between now and 2050. This complexity piece that I was turning to, this is a good representation of what I'm referring to. Our grid was designed, generally speaking, in the US and in most places in a pretty linear fashion. You had demand in one place and supply in another, and you connected those two things. That is being massively disrupted for a lot of really good reasons. Distributed energy resources, solar panels on people's roofs, batteries in their garages. You then now not only have consumption happening, but you also have potential source of supply. You've got batteries that can now feed into the grid, battery storage in substations, another place where electrons can be moving in to the grid rather than coming out of the grid. Those are just some minor examples, but that is happening all over the place in terms of the movement of electrons between places, which hasn't happened before. So our grid was not designed for the system that we're building. The grid was also relatively I hate to say that because I'm sure there's a lot, but not as intelligent as it needed to be. If power goes out somewhere, people don't know where it went out. And I found that extraordinary. That's something I've come to appreciate more in the last few months. Literally, people would call the utility and say, "Hey, my power's out." And they're like, "Oh, that's interesting. Okay, I wonder where the problem is." And they might just shut down the whole section. Maybe shut down. They don't know, or maybe it's just that person's individual house. We need a lot more intelligence around the whole system to manage both demand and supply. It'll make it more efficient, it'll make it more effective, it'll make it safer, et cetera. So this whole piece around complexity requires innovation and will require a lot of investment as well. Which turns me to innovation. I mentioned this modernizing the grid just across the board. There's so much that can happen there that I hope will be part of the solution of reducing the amount of actual generation, new generation that's needed. If we can use the assets that we have better, that could be perhaps one of the major contributions in terms of meeting the needs of the increased energy that's required, and also doing it in a more decarbonized way. If you can use existing transmission lines at a higher capacity than you currently use them, then you can put more renewable energy onto those transmission lines. We don't currently maximize all of that now because we don't have the intelligence, we don't have the technology, et cetera. It's within reach. Those are the kinds of things that need to start happening fairly quickly. More reliable, wind turbines, solar, they're interruptible, they're intermittent, and that's one challenge, which we're trying to fix with batteries, and we supplement with gas turbines so that we can make the whole system more reliable. But as you move past 60, 70, 80% of the grid being supplied by inverter-based resource generation, that's a whole new territory. And we actually, as I understand it, and there's probably people in this room who understand this far better than I do, but as I understand it, we don't totally know how to do this. And there's moments we can do it, and there's pockets where it's done. But in terms of designing a grid that can really rely on the electrons that come from that system, we're not there yet. And so these are real problems that need to be resolved, because if power is going out, it can be a safety issue, it can be a security issue, it can be an economic issue, and people will not embrace the change that's needed. And so resolving some of these issues are quite urgent. So that's all the more. Against all of that more, there's one thing we don't need more of, and that's carbon. And so we need less carbon. All of these things we need to do more, and while we're doing all of that, we need to figure out how do we radically reduce and move to net zero our energy system from where it is today. From the Vernova standpoint, this whole scenario I've just told you has been amazing for us from a market perspective, because everything we're making people want. And I've been in energy for 25 years. I have never seen a market circumstance like this. I mean, it is incredible. And us just getting the things out the door fast enough, is kind of our challenge, and with quality and reliability that our products need to deliver. But unfortunately, we're not while the market conditions are great for companies such as ours, we're not making the transformation at the pace and scale that is needed in terms of achieving net zero by 2050. And at the same time, the climate mood, the climate agenda is shifting. I spent a lot of time reflecting on this over Christmas, and I wouldn't say I've completely settled in my mind exactly how to articulate it. I'm going to give you I'll give you my current version of it. But I have a sense that it's not the change of the administration is quite a dramatic change, for the U.S. Very different philosophies, very very different approaches to energy, the economy, foreign affairs, et cetera. But beyond what's happening on an administrative level, despite the amazing work that's been done and the amount of energy that's been installed with respect to renewable energy over the last couple of decades, which has been extraordinary. The cost of solar has declined far more than people expected even 20 years ago. The cost of wind power has declined more than people expected. The amount of installed capacity has outpaced what everyone expected. So there's a lot of good news. EVs have taken off now. There's been some plateau in there, but nonetheless, I think if you looked at the projections just a few years ago, we've exceeded a lot of those projections. Nonetheless, CO2 emissions have only increased year on year. So despite all of these great gains, we are not making the progress that we need to be. We need to be stopping emissions and bending it quite sharply, quite quickly, in order for us to get to where we want to be by 2050. And so against all that backdrop, where are we? And I'd say that aside from the administration change, which I mentioned, I think there's a bit of a reassessment happening within the climate community. We're finding that rewiring supply chains, developing new infrastructure, clear regulatory frameworks, and strong demand signals for low carbon products have proven more challenging than expected globally. So all of those things are highly relevant in terms of your ability to deploy and scale quickly. And it's just been a real challenge. And I think people are seeing that challenge, feeling that challenge, are frustrated by that challenge, and are wondering, how are we going to do this? Maybe we should change course. Maybe this isn't really going to happen in the way that it needs to happen. And so, and these are real issues. And so, taking a few of them one by one, I'll share a few reflections in terms of how I've seen the challenges. I mean, the first one is scale. I don't know the exact number. I've seen something like $80 to $100 trillion is our energy system, but this is the energy system we've created over 100 years. We're trying to change it within decades, 10 to 20 years. We're trying to massively change it. That is hard. It is hard to build infrastructure projects. I have been in energy for 25 years. I've worked on developing energy projects all around the world. I hope this doesn't offend, but one of the things I would say, it is an act of God. I mean, the blood, sweat, and tears it takes to get a large capital project to financial investment decision, and then to build it and then to operate it is extraordinary. And unless you're seeing it, you wouldn't believe it. Like the things that people have to do to make these things happen is extraordinary. And we're basically asking the world to do that at a pace it's never done before. So I think that's just a hard reality. When you've got to put steel in the ground that's in somebody's state or in somebody's country or somebody's backyard, that will have community impacts, that will have political impacts, that will have tax impacts, that will have system impacts. It's hard even when you're working with things that have been done before. And we're trying to do, in many cases, things that have never been done before. For the new things we're trying to do, like biofuels and hydrogen, you're having to create entire new value chains. I worked on a biofuels project at Shell. I sanctioned it. They've since shut it down. I'll call that out immediately. When I sanctioned that project, all of the risks you would assume, some of those I've just mentioned. But one of the main risks was there wasn't really a viable supply chain for feedstock. The scale of biological material required to generate the sustainable aviation fuel that would be needed to replace fossil fuels is almost incomprehensible. And right now, that is like cooking oil from McDonald's. And so you've got to get trucks that go around and collect cooking oil. As an example, that's not the only thing, but that's a fact. That's true. That's happening in Europe today, that there's trucks going around the cities of Europe and collecting oil for sustainable aviation fuel. That is tough. Hydrogen. Again, my time at Shell, building one of the largest hydrogen facilities in Rotterdam, offtake for the next 10, 20 years. Who's going to buy it? At what price? At what volume? Not clear. Companies like Shell that have massive balance sheets can take some of these risks, but they can only take a few of them because they can go out of business if they take too many of them. So this is where the collaboration and the orchestration across society is absolutely fundamental. These risks have to be borne across society. They have to be borne by governments taking a position, by companies taking a position, by regulators taking a position to get all of this stuff lined up. And that coordination piece has not happened at the scale and pace that we need. And just maybe one last point on that, and I've taken far longer than I expected to, by the way. So let me try and bring this to a close so we can move to the Q&A. I talked about some of the project complexities and some of the challenges of FIDs and the challenges of bringing these projects to fruition. But if I maybe focus a little bit more on some of the coordination that's needed even within a sector. So if you think about sustainable aviation fuel, you need to have the fuel produced, which I told you that's its own challenge. It's difficult to build a refinery and operate the refinery, let alone build a sustainable aviation fuel refinery with the right supply chain. And oh, by the way, the regulation around biomaterials is quite complicated. And you need to keep track of every molecule that flows through your system, or you'll be fined by the regulator. It's all good intent, but it's very hard to do. Even when you're trying to do this well, it is very, very hard to do. So biofuel's difficult. Now, if I just then say, okay, let's assume you get the supply nailed. You've got to have the airplane turbine certified to use that material. You've got to have the logistics to get it to the airport in place. You've got to have the airports supporting having that. And then you have to have all the commercial arrangements, and then you need to price it. That coordination within a sector is incredibly hard. And many players are trying to make that happen, but this is just to give you a sense of the challenge. Against all of this, which may be counter to what you've just heard me say, I am actually very optimistic. I'm an optimistic person. And I am hopeful that this moment of shift that we're seeing, certainly within the US and perhaps at some level globally on the climate agenda, I want to embrace as an opportunity, because I think there are a lot of overlaps with what we're trying to do in terms of addressing the climate issues that actually serve national security interests, that naturally serve prosperity for the US and globally. And to the extent that we can reframe and rethink and regroup around where we have commonality and common ground, I believe we can make a difference. So if you use AI as an example, huge energy requirements. Fortunately, the people who need that energy have a lot of money. These are the best capitalized companies on the planet. In addition, AI is not just about selling us more products. It is about how we're going to run our societies going forward more and more. And so there is a national security and urgency around ensuring that the AI sector can get the power and develop the technology so we can stay ahead of the curve rather than behind the curve. So we now have interests that really need to have this energy and need to have it quickly. And then we have the climate agenda, which is looking for new and better solutions for a better made grid, a lower carbon energy sources. And I think we can bring all of these parties together in a way that allows a holistic approach to this moment that can enable the energy that's needed to provide to address the national security interests that we have, while also creating better systems that enable an energy system that is cleaner and more affordable and more reliable. If we approach this as a system problem, if we approach this in a holistic way, I think that is the opportunity ahead of us. I think Stanford is well placed in terms of helping the world think about it in this way. Rather than how do we make sure company A gets the energy that they need, how do we make sure that California can host this energy in a way that addresses the needs of society and enable the power that's needed for the AI while enabling more green electrons to come onto the system, and a system that holistically can operate more reliably and at a lower cost. I genuinely believe that this is possible. What it needs is leadership, it needs good ideas, and it needs collaboration. That's why I'm here today, because I want to collaborate with Stanford. I want corporates such as ourselves to work closely with the academics, who I think can provide a safe space, if you will, an objective space to bring different parties together. I learned my time at Shell, if I tried to propose something, it was very difficult for people to believe I wasn't serving my own self-interest. This is where academics can provide that objectivity. It can provide the expertise, the insight. It can bring different resources together so that we can really take the opportunity, the capital that will be made available for prosperity and economic security and AI is an opportunity for us to come with the big idea. What is the big idea that we can put in front of the key stakeholders so that we can all come into this with a sense of enthusiasm and opportunity and create the energy system of the future while creating the economic and societal system of the future as well. Thank you for coming here today, and hopefully that gave you a bit of perspective on the company and some of my thoughts. And Will, I invite you up to ask me questions.
GE Vernova does almost everything. Very impressive to see it laid out in this fashion. Jessica, I really admire your 2+ decades of service to the energy transition. I want to dig in a little bit there. You know, your experience at Shell, now you're leading GE Vernova. Just get a sense of your view of what has happened so far before we talk about the future. You know, throughout this journey, there has been a lot of aspirations, predictions, hype, goals, failures, triumphs, you name it. So you've seen a lot of it. I would like to ask you to find 2 examples. That'll give you some time to think about it.
I haven't seen this question before. So
The first example is something that surprised you in a positive way along this journey. And the second is a negative sample, something that didn't meet your expectation. And the reason for my asking is, as a scientist, we love to look at how good our predictions are. The best way is to look back in history. So let me give you some time to think about it. And then the second question I want to ask you about is your role at Shell and GE now, you being involved in both companies, traditional and new energy. What are the similarities in the mindsets of the 2 corporations? And what are the differences? So hopefully that gives you some time to process.
Yeah, it's hard to process and listen. So you might have to
surprises of your 2-decade journey in these aspirations, hype, failures, the things that worked, the things that didn't work. What surprised you?
I mean, I mentioned a couple in terms of just the pace of innovation, cost reduction, and deployment of renewable energy. So I first came into the wind industry in the late 90s. And I think I mentioned this earlier today. I asked the chief scientist of the company I was at the time, what's the maximum capacity a wind turbine could achieve? And at the time, you know, I think he said something like 6 or 7 megawatts. So within 20 years, somebody who was deeply knowledgeable about the physics of wind turbines had massively underestimated what was possible. And that's awesome.
Wow.
You know, so that's awesome in terms of, and I come back to that a lot whenever I think, oh, that's a limit or that's not possible. It's hard for me to really understand where the physics are on things because there are these breakthroughs. And we certainly have seen that. And so that's super encouraging. I think, I mean, if I think more widely about it, I have been generally, you know, I went to Berkeley and yeah, go Bears. And although I huge admiration and I appreciate being here at Stanford. But you know, I graduated from Berkeley and did not have a very positive view, California progressive, if you will, around corporate America, because that's not uncommon, I think, with youth and, you know, and many of these institutions. I have been positively surprised at the genuine passion and commitment I have found across companies to be a part of the solution. And I think that can be underestimated. People can think a company like Shell or a company like Vernova that's generating gas, producing gas turbines, that there is this dogged attachment to a legacy system and that people don't care or aren't interested or aren't. And I, for the most part, on average, have been positively surprised at the level of commitment, because I work a lot with nonprofits as well. So I can kind of, I put the kind of cultural elements and the personal commitment elements. People are people care. And there's different environments in which we choose to work. But I think the passion and commitment I've seen has been a positive surprise.
That's wonderful to hear. How about some things that didn't meet your expectation? Maybe things that you thought would happen faster, it took a lot longer, or things that didn't happen at all?
Yeah. So again, I always start at kind of a meta level, if you will, no reference to the company, but like at a bigger level. And I think I've been a little bit disappointed that the reason doesn't always matter. Like politics matters. There's tribalism all over the place. And so you think it's such an obvious thing. Of course we should do X, and this is the right answer. Things like vested interests. And so that piece of humanity, if you will, I think that has been hard for me over the course of my career when trying to do the right thing and been stopped for, the wrong reasons. So that's my meta answer. In terms of a more practical, tangible on the energy system, I think, and I was talking to you about this earlier, I'm surprised in many ways how slowly we've moved on the energy transition. Again, aside from the renewables piece, I don't think we've done a very good job as climate leader community simplifying what needs to happen and helping the world see a pathway from where we are to where we need to be. And I think that's caused a lot of activity and ultimately a lot of frustration that we need to deal with now. Things like there's lots of great answers out there. Building efficiency. You've got a piece on that. According to the IEA, buildings, if you take into consideration the construction and the operation, represent some 40% of the CO2 emissions. Does anyone talk about that? And that's actually, fixing buildings isn't super technically hard, but yet we spend a lot of time talking about hydrogen infrastructure, and CCS, that's really hard stuff, and we need to do those things, don't get me wrong, but some of the stuff that's just sitting there on the table doesn't get anybody's attention. And like putting drapes up, like that would be really effective, and things like that, and so I've been surprised how what captures the public imagination on climate and how we've somehow missed some of the easier, not saying easier and more obvious moves we could have made over the last 30 years.
I just want to say I completely agree on the building side. That's something that we at Stanford have been thinking a lot about. There are, like you said, technological innovation, which may take 10, 20 years to deploy. Yeah. There are also easier things like commercial innovation. In the case of building, sometimes it's a matter of education. Yeah. Make sure that the tradespeople, the architects know the best practices. And it's not just about getting new technology, maybe rearranging the current technology in a more efficient manner. So indeed, we could not agree more on that. I think there are so many low-hanging fruits that we can address. And it's up to us and corporations to find them and then execute them in the right order. Well, thank you for sharing those two positive and negative expectations. Now coming to my second question, Shell and GE, you're looking at both traditional and new energy at both companies. You were mentioned to me last night that the mindsets are similar in some respects, but also very different. Yeah. So give us some insights into how your mindsets are transforming between the two roles.
That's good. It's good. And the context of both companies matters. So part of it is what industry are you in, Euro, American, all of those things will have an impact on the culture and the feel of a place. Shell, another 130-year-ish company operating in over 100 countries. What's significant about Shell, I think, one of the fundamental things about Shell that it influences the culture of the place is that it is managing incredible risk every day. So if you're running deep water assets, in order to make sure that that is safe and sound every minute of the day, has a pretty profound impact on the entire organization. If you're running chemical plants, and so the seriousness in which you've got to run the company, I think, is pretty profound. And so that's one piece. Whereas that weight of responsibility is not as heavy in a company like Vernova. I mean, there's a huge amount of responsibility, don't get me wrong, and where are things, but it's a different kind of process safety issue that I think really influences every minute you're at a company like Shell. But I don't think that's what you're asking me, and I'm sorry. I will go back to what you're asking me more specifically, but it is something that I notice in terms of how I feel in a place. The fact that Vernova is a startup, these 12 companies weren't together before, lots of change. Who are we? We're not GE, we're something else. So there's this moment, this very dynamic moment of finding itself that's happening, which is super cool because you feel like you can change it immediately, whereas at Shell, change was harder. There's things I've made happen in one day at Vernova that would have probably taken me 6 or 9 months at Shell. And so there is probably a pace difference that I'm seeing. But what I would say is that, again, from a culture perspective, the legacy and the new, I see the same tensions. It is hard to carry both the legacy and the new from a sense of making sure that everyone's included, everyone's on the boat, everyone matters, no one's preferred, and that we all have to respect, care, and work together collaboratively and as one company. And there can be tensions around that because what do you mean you want to go into new energies? What's wrong with what I'm doing? And what's my future in this company and things like that? And so trying to manage that, because the world needs both and you need to respect both, and carrying that and bringing the whole organization, I think I've seen both of the challenges similar in both of them. And as I said before, the amount of passion and commitment to the energy transition I saw at Shell impressed me, and it completely impresses me at Vernova. And we call ourselves a purpose-built company, energy to change the world. We're here to electrify and decarbonize. It's a pretty pure company and message, and that gives a lot of energy to the people in terms of why they're showing up at work, to work every day.
That's wonderful to hear. Maybe now let's take the conversation to look forward. And the one thing that really sort of keeps me up at night is the speed of the energy transition. You alluded to earlier that, yes, we should and can move faster.
Yeah.
But with that said, a lot of the social acceptance around the transition is going to depend on energy remaining highly reliable, remaining affordable. And I think there's a fine balance between moving too slowly versus moving too rapidly. As a person who works on material science, when you move too quickly, sometimes instability happens. And this could set us back. Talk us through a little bit about, at Shell, now at GE Vernova, how do you think about the right speed of moving the energy transition so that you can remain stable, you can remain affordable? How do you use your technology levers, your financial levers to really meter it just about right?
No, that's good. It's and this goes back to something I referenced in terms of the coordination and collaboration that's needed across a given value chain. And, there's lots of chicken and egg dilemmas that you have. a Maersk that needs to do their new order for ships for 2035 needs to start making decisions now on the engine they will select. Will that be methanol? Will that be hydrogen? Will it somehow be some new electron? And for them to make that, they have to have confidence that they're going to be able to get that volume and that they can get that price. That's super hard for them to make that decision in this environment, because they've got to place the order, and then it's going to take another 5+ years before those ships are built, et cetera. And so those are the chicken and egg dilemmas that everyone's managing. And then you go to the fuel supply side, such as a Shell, and should we be providing methanol? Should we be providing hydrogen? Should we be pushing LNG? And if we do, is Maersk going to buy it and 10 other companies to justify building that project? And then are we going to build out the distribution chains that we need? So what I would say is that, this is kind of the crux of a number of the problems that we have. I think to the extent companies have to take risks to lead. And so you need to be willing to take measured risks, good risks that reflect the capabilities that you have. And so my view when I was at Shell, we should be in CCS. We know geology. Yeah, we've done this work before. If that's going to happen and the world needs it, we need to be involved. Sustainable aviation fuel. We're in the chemicals business and we're in the refining business. We've got the core competencies that justify us getting involved in biofuels. We should lean into that. But there's a huge amount of risks that we're going to have to manage. But you lean into it for 1 or 2. If you lean into them for 3 or 4, you start then having a negative material impact on the financial performance of the company. And your shareholders start wondering who's in charge. Are you guys really managing this whole thing effectively? You can take some risk, but there is a limit. And every company's got to figure out where that limit is. Because, innovation happens all the time. Apple tries new things. They were trying to do it on an autonomous car, correct? Right? They stopped that program. So taking risk, trying new things, every company needs to do that. But it has to be within bounds. And every company will have their own bounds in terms of the financial exposure that they can take. This is part of why I think the climate community can and should work closer with companies like Exxon, Chevron, Shell, because they've got incredible balance sheets. They can actually do a lot more than the average company can do. Vernova doesn't have that balance sheet. Very strong company financially. We've got a good balance sheet. But the Shells, the Exxons, et cetera, they're like $400, $500, $600, $700 billion balance sheets. They can do more than the average company. Similarly, for Vernova, 100% hydrogen turbines. How do we make our gas turbines CCS compatible? Where are the places where we have a right to play, that we have the technological capability and the experience, the market positions, et cetera, for us to move into that space? And you need to take some risk. And that return may not become in the first even 5 or 10 years. These things can be longer duration, but there's a limit. And every company's got to figure out that limit. If you bet the house, as an investor, you might maybe buy 1 condo and put it on Airbnb, but are you going to do 20 of them? The same principles apply for companies as it does for individuals. You'll take a little bit of risk. Maybe that'll work. Okay, if that works, maybe I'll do 1 more. And that's the game that we're all playing. And I think to break out of that, that's where I look at the AI and I see the amount of wealth that these companies have and the infrastructure that they need. Can we come with a big idea? How do we leverage that capital to break through some of this and create the alignment and focus among the stakeholders that matter to move faster than we've moved in the past?
Yeah. I think one of the consequences of taking too little risk or too much risk is it stops the flow of capital that is necessary to do this. And for those in the room who have studied this, know that the amount of capital required for the energy transition is tremendous. So currently, we're spending about $1.2, $1.3 trillion per year. And the estimates are upwards of $5 to $10 or $12 trillion per year is necessary for the next 25 years or more to carry out the transition. So something that I think that really, another thing that keeps me up at night is how do we unlock the flow of capital? Walk us through, as a former CFO of Shell, what are the levers you use? What are the levers others can use to make sure the capital can go from the $1+ trillion today to the 10 trillion that is necessary? How do we make this step jump? What must be true for the capital to flow more efficiently?
You manage the risk and the capital comes. So the wind sector, the solar sector had no problem attracting capital because the development risk was managed, the technical risk was managed, the execution risk of building the projects was managed, the operation of those assets could be relied on. And so all of the risks of that business model were secured in a way that capital felt confident that if I put money into this project, I was going to get it back and I would get a return commensurate to the risk that I was taking. That's what unlocks capital. Now, you can have concessionary capital, you can have subsidies, you can have, and many of those things are needed. The PTC or other means are important and can be a piece of that puzzle. But we need to get to a place where, one, the return is attractive, and maybe that requires subsidy, maybe it doesn't. But two, importantly, that the suite of risks that I referenced earlier, the supply chain, the execution risk, the operating risk, have all been addressed. And this is where I think corporates can play an important role. As I mentioned, Shell, with its balance sheet, or other large oil and gas majors, can carry far more risk than the average company. And so I think everyone should be encouraging new technology and scaling up to leverage that as much as possible. Within Vernova, one of the things that I was inspired to come into the company and try and make happen was to work with startups to help scale and deploy technology faster. Because if you have a battery, if you have an electrolyzer, if you have any new technology and it's a piece of equipment, for a utility to buy it, for a company to buy it, they want to make sure it's going to run. These companies may not have any operating history. They want to make sure the warranty can be relied on, that in 5 years' time, if something needs to be fixed, there's going to be somebody who answers the phone. A company like Vernova can offer those things. And so I think the corporates have a potential role here to help be the step in the evolution of the clean tech economy, moving from kind of VC to PE to corporate world, to help manage some of those risks and to enable scaling and deployment more quickly. I did a bit of work with Breakthrough Energy before I joined Vernova and met all these cool companies. I was like, you guys are amazing. This technology is amazing. We could have used this at Shell. But the gulf between those companies and a company like Shell is vast. And so I did some work trying to do some matchmaking during my time. It's hard to get the attention of a company as big as Shell, so there's other things that you need to break through. But that's part of what I'm trying to do at Vernova. We've got a ventures team. We've got this investment Inform. We're working closely with them to see how we can help them solve some of their problems more quickly. So I think there's a model here that we need to develop within Vernova and more widely.
Now, I think it's really exciting to hear that large corporations can have a very active role in working with innovators to improve the risk profile.
Totally.
Therefore, then to unlock the necessary capital. So I feel a sense of optimism that perhaps we're not quite optimized in terms of risk right now, but when we do, the money will come.
Absolutely.
Before I open, sorry.
No, I was just saying, I think so, yes.
Great. Before we open up to questions here, I do have one final item that I would like to discuss. Signpost. You have outlined many milestones over the past 100 years of history for GE Vernova. And going forward, there's going to be some major signposts and milestones. I like to look at signposts because my kids always ask me, are we there yet? So what is the next big signpost we should be looking for the energy transition?
Ah,
That's going to make you like, all right, we're getting closer. We're moving in the right direction.
that's a really good. So I thought you were going to ask me about Vernova, and the first thing that came to mind was commercial operations of our SMR in 2029. So that was one that immediately came to mind.
It's a big one, yeah.
As an important milestone. There's many others, but that was the first one that popped into my head. I think I would like to see in the next couple of years a holistic system solution being executed in the realm of providing energy to AI. I think that could be a new model where we're able to bring together, again, these different stakeholders, different objectives, but there's commonality in what's trying to be achieved that will enable us to move differently and more quickly on the energy transition.
I have a feeling that signpost will show up sooner than I think.
I hope so.
This is very exciting. Let's take a few questions from the audience. Inesh raised her hand up fast.
Yeah, you spoke really nicely to the different types of risks and necessary risk mitigation across these businesses as being a critical piece of this. All the way from situations of locking in shipping and not knowing what types of fuels need to be used, to how do you address offshore wind. We will need vessels that are produced and operated by US firms and so on and so forth. So I'm wondering if you had a magic wand that could persuade now the regulators of changing something, and that something could range from incentives to facilitate transmission permitting, what have you. What would be the one thing that would really help GE Vernova materialize its vision more quickly? What would be the regulatory change that would really make a difference besides carbon prices, since that's unlikely to materialize? Yeah.
Thank you. For the energy transition, it's difficult, of course, to pick one, but I probably would pick transmission. So if we could enable the construction of more transmission, I think it could unlock a huge amount of renewable energy here in the United States. That's probably not the global answer, but here for the US, I would lean on transmission.
Hello. Oh, anyways, my name is Million. I'm a freshman here at Stanford. I really appreciated what you mentioned. So many, including like from nonprofits and versus like big companies, oil companies specifically like Shell, and how there's sometimes, distrust or being skeptical of it. But as you mentioned, they are the ones with a lot of resources. They're all over the world. They have the capacity to do so. And you mentioned it's also hard to get Shell to, pay attention to these other smaller companies.
Yeah.
And what are the things that have worked to convince the two to work together in a time where we need collaboration to solve the issues that our planet is facing? Thank you.
No, it's good. And to be clear, when I say some of the challenges, I think there's a challenge around scale that a company of that size generally is trying to work in places where it can have a scale impact. And so if you're dealing with a kind of a small startup in California, it may not have, in terms of your resource allocation, is that the right thing for me to be spending time on? Will I have that scale impact? So it's not that it's the issue so much, but it's always how do you allocate your time, and how do I make sure I'm allocating my time to the thing that has the biggest impact? I think where that works best is obviously when the given company, the small company, has the technology or business model or solution that's most closely aligned with the strategy of the company. And this is where the role of customers can play a huge piece in this. And so the demand side of the climate and energy challenges that we have, I think also gets underplayed. If any company's key customers ask for zero carbon supply chain, that's something that Walmart does quite effectively, that reduced water use or lower material use, et cetera. companies then have a mandate and a need to find innovation, find new solutions. And so, and will look outside its own doors for those kinds of things. So where there is an alignment of what the market wants, what the customer wants, that can encourage large companies to work differently than they've worked in the past. So I think it's a combination of strategy and making sure that there's a good fit, and the role of customers in the market in terms of demanding companies to do things differently has a huge impact.
And do you foresee joint projects with your researchers? Do you have other modes of collaboration, or are you open to the very idea of different ways of collaborating?
Yes, to all of that. So
That's good.
yes. So I think we work with some 45 universities today, primarily in the US, but also outside of the US, because we've got a large presence, particularly in Europe. And it takes all, I think, many shapes and forms. And Justin and Amy are both from the research center, and I would welcome, you can speak more with them as well. We get grants from the Department of Defense and from the Department of Energy. Many of those we do in partnership with universities for those projects. We may also choose to partner because we don't have a capability, or we want to enhance some expertise in terms of projects that we're working on for ourselves, for our customers. So we're open, and we're looking for meaningful partnerships. We're looking to have a couple kind of what I'd say privileged relationships with a handful, so that we make sure we put the time and energy into that relationship to get the most out of it. I don't want it to just be something where we send a check, or, but that we're actually meaningfully engaging with one another and learning from one another and making a difference.
Thanks for laying out a very grand vision. And the way I saw it, there are you have materials and resources, computing, energy, three of the grand challenge areas that humans are facing. But you also have basic research, translation, and scale, build at scale. Given you are a startup, but you're also public, so your stock owners are going to be less patient with the R&D and the translational aspects of it. So how do you see mapping your current role without the umbrella of the bigger GE, the mothership? People are going to be impatient, at least the Wall Streeters.
I haven't heard that yet. So I can imagine that to be true. And maybe this is part of my optimistic nature. The energy system needs innovation. And I firmly believe that if you don't innovate, we won't be relevant in 10, 15 years, because if we're not doing it, someone else will do it. So I think it's in the long-term interest of the value of the company and to our shareholders that we're innovating. The challenge is to do it well. So how do you use your money effectively? Don't have hobbies, translate it to value, et cetera. Now, we won't get it all right. You have to do things that don't work in order to find the right thing. But having the right boundaries around that, the right culture, the right environment that really enables creativity and innovation. I'm super excited to try and make that happen and make that be true both internally and externally. So, and right now the company is doing really well. And so I think we have a grace period, in terms of really favorable markets, both kind of commercial markets, but also the equity markets are very supportive of us. So I think that's giving us a bit more bandwidth as well.
All right, Sally has the final question.
The last word. Anyway, thank you for a really fantastic set of remarks. So, we have a new school of sustainability here. And, you mentioned being a Berkeley student and, being kind of skeptical about companies and so forth. And I think that persists, that, many young people who want to go work in sustainability, they think that comes at the expense of, making a good salary or whatever. And my experience working with companies is that's not at all true. I mean, every company that I talk with now, they have very high expectations of their engineers, everyone in the company to integrate that kind of thinking into the decisions they're making and so forth. And so I'm wondering that, given sort of the new world where, your optimistic assessment of the companies are really committed to change, what do you think that we need to make sure that our students are equipped with in terms of knowledge, skills, perspectives, outlooks that would make our students very attractive for your company?
Thank you. My sense is the students are very attractive to the company. It's a good starting point.
Yeah. In terms of, engineers, chemical engineers, mechanical engineers who, design from the beginning with zero waste or focus on efficiency or some set of, because again, there really is this perception that they're two separate things. Like there's all the real work and then there's sustainability being a separate thing. And I just don't think that they are two separate things anymore. I think they're fully integrated.
I agree.
And I don't know that we're communicating that well to our students.
I
And
completely
perhaps
agree.
it's because we're not teaching them the right things that that would be helpful for them to know as they would go to work for a company like yours.
So just a few reflections. I completely agree with you. I think sustainability is most effective and most real when it is simply the way you run your company. And it's a better way. It's a more efficient way. It's a more thoughtful way. It engages the full stakeholder base in a way that you should for companies to ultimately be sustainable in all meanings of that word. So I'm whenever I have an opportunity, whatever leadership position I'm in, is to bring that thinking, that this is just the strategy. This is not kind of something you do on Friday. This is just how every decision is being embedded in that decision we're making. I think one really good functional skills, like expertise. Now you talk about mechanical engineering. So I think that's just a given here, but I think of my daughter who is graduating this year in international relations. I studied political economics. You need functional skills. What are you going to contribute and to whatever the problem may be? And that can be in human resources, that can be in coding, that can be in engineering. So there's sometimes just those basic things, like not basic, but fundamental things need to be true. What I would add to that is, and Will, you mentioned this in terms of the approach, I think, to the school, perhaps to Precourt, is systems thinking, integrated thinking, holistic thinking. I think that's super powerful. To make any project happen, we had a couple of these conversations today, there's a technical piece, and that has to work. But then you've got to execute, there's operational risk, then there's a commercial piece to it. How much money is it going to make? There's a regulatory piece to it. I think individuals who can think in a holistic way and integrate different disciplines and integrate thinking are the people who can anticipate the problems, anticipate the issues, and often creativity sits on the interfaces of things. There's within your discipline innovation and creativity, but there's a huge amount that happens between the finance person who understands a bit of engineering, the engineering person who understands a bit of finance. That can be super powerful. So I think that interdisciplinary, that holistic, integrative thinking would be the thing that I would perhaps offer as an area of focus.
Well, thank you so much, Jessica. Please join me in thanking Jessica for energizing us this afternoon. And thank you so much. And thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you.